Hey, what's up, Inside Out? How y'all doing tonight? Can you guys make some noise for being inside tonight? Is that not just amazing? Y'all, the stress of watching the hurricane this past week, and I was like, oh my goodness, I was afraid the tent was gonna blow away and all stuff. And I was like, wait, we get to be in the building on Sunday. And I was so thankful and so excited to be back here inside. For some of you guys, this is the first time that you've actually been a part of Inside Out in Brownsbridge's actual church building. So welcome to Inside Out. I know things are still different. I know things are still really weird in this season, and it just kind of is what it is right now. And I started thinking about just kind of where I wanted to go with our message tonight and what I wanted to say to you guys and how we were going to kind of talk about this. And it made me think about a friend of mine in high school. I had a friend in high school named Jake. Is there anybody here named Jake in the room tonight? Jakes? No Jakes, man. All right, cool. Well, I had a friend in high school named Jake. I feel like it's a common name. I thought I was gonna get at least one. But I had a friend named Jake, and Jake was that guy in my friend group, and you guys will know who it is. You'll probably start looking around and find the one in your friend group. But Jake was the friend in my friend group that if he ever could, he made a situation weird. It was one of those people that's it's this, an underlying tension in the room, or maybe everybody is kind of knows that, oh, they used to date and now they're having to sit by each other in class. Or, it's just kind of a situation where everybody kind of knows it, but nobody says anything, right? Because we're all kind, decent human beings. My friend Jake was not one of those kind, decent human beings. Actually, he is. He just is oblivious to what's going on around him. And he's just the guy that pointed out weird stuff. He was the guy that pointed out, oh, this is awkward, isn't it? It was well, it is now that you brought it up. And so there was a time specifically where Jake really he got me good. He got me in probably the worst way he's ever gotten me. When I was in my sophomore year of high school, shout out to the sophomores in the room. When I was in my sophomore year of high school, I started dating this girl. And we dated for a few months, and then summer break came, and we both got jobs and got real busy, and it didn't work out, and we ended things. And it wasn't messy, it wasn't a nasty breakup. We were both just kind of hey, we don't really hang out enough to continue this. This is not going well. So we broke things off and stayed friends, and it was no big deal. So my senior year, 2 years later, my best friend, Chris, started taking an interest in this girl. Now I moved on, I had gotten a new girlfriend or whatever, and he was like, hey, I really like this girl, but I know y'all have a history. Is that weird? Can I ask her out? Or, something like that. And I said, no, man, it's not weird at all. That was a couple years ago. I've moved on. Clearly she's trying to move on. It's no big deal. You should ask her out. She's cool. So he did. And they started to date, and a couple months down the road, we had prom. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with prom. It's basically you wear fancy clothes, you go out to dinner, and you go to a dance. And so we're at prom, we're getting ready to go to prom, and sitting together is me and my girlfriend, and then right beside them is Chris and his girlfriend. And Jake is sitting across the table from us at our dinner, and he looks up and he's like, this is probably pretty weird, huh? And I was like, what? And he's like, because y'all used to date and now you don't? And I was like, why would you bring that up right now? What in your head makes you feel like this is a good time to bring that up and to talk about it? And so, we did what everybody does at that age of life. We held an awkward silence for 30 seconds and then moved on the conversation. But inside, I was like, I'm gonna kill him. That was so weird for my new girlfriend. That was so weird for my friend Chris. We haven't really thought about it, or it's not weird for us, but now that you bring it up, it makes it weird. And so I just was like, you know what, tonight at Inside Out, I wanna be Jake. I mean, I'm not Jake, I'm Heath, but I wanna be Jake tonight. The last few months and what you guys have experienced in Inside Out, the past, 8 months for you sophomores, and really the whole time you've been in Inside Out for our freshmen, it's been kind of weird. And I think that tonight, I just kind of wanna address it. It's weird. It's weird coming in here and having a square to sit in with your group you guys are in Upstreet and you have the circles. You guys know what I'm talking about, the circles in Upstreet? I feel like when we were taping stuff down today, I was like, oh man, they're gonna hate this. It was one of those situations where I was like, I know it doesn't feel good. And if that's not bad enough, when we're in the building, it's actually more important for you to wear your mask. And at this point in time, we're all over the mask thing. We hate it. In fact, I volunteered to speak tonight so I could be far enough away from all of you guys that I wouldn't have to wear one. And so it was one of those situations where I know you don't want to wear the mask. I know you're sick of them, and it's getting old, right? And on top of all those things, you come in and they do the temperature check thing, and I always just am whoa, I don't really know what that's, I don't want you to aim that gun at my forehead. It's weird. This is a weird season. I feel like when we're like old and gray and we're your grandparents' age, we're gonna look back and we're gonna tell our grandkids to be like, you guys won't believe my freshman year of high school. Like you will not believe what we had to go through and the craziness that we lived through. So tonight I want us to kind of just like say, hey, what do we do now? Like what do we do? Like here we are, we're back inside. Honestly, it's gonna be kind of like this for a little while, at least until like Christmas break. Like this is what it's gonna be like at Inside Out. So what do we do? Like how do we make this as good as we possibly can? How do you guys have the best possible experience that you possibly can in Inside Out? And how do we make this something that God can still use to get us through the hard days and weeks that we go through? How do we make Inside Out something that you guys feel beneficial as a part of your life? And so I think the number one thing that I want us to do is that we trust God, which is like, I know, super simplistic, but we trust God because I feel like that's all that we can do in this season. And to kind of illustrate this, I started thinking about like two questions, like how do we trust God? And specifically, I asked these two questions and I want us to look at tonight. The first one is this. It says, how do we know that he keeps his promises? How do we trust God that, hey, like God's gonna get us through this? Like he's promised to never leave us and never forsake us. Like he's got us in this season, but how do we trust him? How do we believe him and the promises that he's made to us? And the second question is this, what promises does he have for us right now? And then as I started thinking about this, I thought about an Old Testament character in the Bible. This guy lived, thousands and thousands of years ago, but he had a really great ability to take promises that God had given him and to believe them and allow God to use those promises to change not only his life, but to change the world. And so tonight we're gonna look at the story of a guy named Abram. You've probably heard the story of Abram before. About halfway through his story, he changes his name, or actually God changes his name to Abraham, and he's one of the kind of founding members of the Jewish faith. Like he's kind of the guy that God sets aside and says, Abraham, through you, I'm gonna create my group of people, the Israelite nation. And this is what we're talking about tonight. We're gonna talk about God's promises to Abram, later known as Abraham. In Genesis chapter 12, the first few verses of Genesis chapter 12 says this, as God makes his promises to Abram. Here's what it says. The Lord had said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to a land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation and I will bless you. I will make your name great and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. God makes some big promises to Abram, right? Like he makes some really big promises to Abram. And if you don't know the story of Abram, if you haven't heard what's going on in Abram's life, Abram and his wife Sarah are unable to have kids. And so God shows up and is like, hey, Abram, I'm gonna do something special through you and I'm gonna make you some big promises and all the people in the world are gonna be blessed through you and your family. And Abram is like, huh? Like, it was one of those moments that I feel like he and God had probably had like a Jake moment where Abram had to be Jake in that moment. It's like, God, I don't have any kids and I'm old. Like, I don't know that it's happening for me and my wife. Like it was a weird probably moment. And honestly, if I was in Abram's shoes, I don't know how much I would have believed God. But God makes Abram three big promises. Here they are. He says, number first, I'm gonna make you into a great nation. He's like, I'm gonna take you and your descendants and you're gonna be a great and mighty nation. I'm gonna give you a promised land that you get to live in and your people will be known for generations and generations to come. And that's when Abram's like, oh, okay, God, about that. Like there's a lot that's gotta happen for that to take place because I don't have any descendants right now. Like that would have been hard to believe. But then God goes on and says like, hey, like I'm gonna make your family and make your name great. People are gonna be talking about you and your family for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And then lastly, God says that I will make you and your descendants a blessing to the nations. You're gonna be a blessing to everyone who comes after you. And I started reading those and I was like, man, I really wish I could have a conversation like that with God today where I was like, okay, God, in this season where everything's hard, everything's difficult, everything's honestly is just kind of weird and off, what are the promises that you have for us in this season? What are the things that you can come to us and promise us like you promised Abram? And as I was like praying that and trying to figure out what God's promises for us are, I felt God giving me a piece that says like, hey, my promises to Abram, I fulfilled, and we'll get into that in a second. He says, but also like, they're very similar to the promises that I have for you. They're very similar to the promises I have for Inside Out. Here's what I came up with. God's promises to you are very similar. In this season, God's gonna give you a place. Now, I can't promise you he's gonna make you a great nation, but like he's gonna give you a place. Like throughout all of this COVID stuff, like we've had a place to meet. Now, unfortunately, it was like online and Zoom, and that got old after like one time. And then, we were like, okay, let's try something else. Let's see if we can like meet outside, like in driveways and parks and stuff. And that, eventually kind of got old after like 2 times. And then like, I was like, all right, we will rent this big tent and we'll put everybody outside and we'll at least get to like gather together and do worship and stuff. Maybe 3 times, and that one got old. Like, time and time again, I was like, okay, God, like we got to get back in the building. We got to get stuff going. And God's like, hey, are you missing out on the fact that I've provided a place every step of the way? And it convicted me because I didn't like the things that God provided, and I didn't like the things that we were doing, but I was convicted because I was like, oh, but in these places, God has provided a way, and he's provided a place for us to gather together, for you guys to meet with the people that you're sitting with right now. And so he promises he'll have a place for us. Second thing, he says he'll promise he'll have a people for us, that you have a group, 10th graders. You guys have been through a wild year and a half at InsideOut. Like it's been crazy. Like the amount of changes and stuff that you guys have had to weather. Like thank you so much for being plugged in and bought in enough that you still show up every week. Because here's the thing, a lot of your friends haven't, right? Like you've probably known a lot of people that started out in your group and they're not here. Freshmen, like I am blown away every week that you guys show up, and this is like not the way I envisioned your kickoff to InsideOut going. But you've bought in and you hang out with your leaders and you hang out with your people in your small group, and y'all are bonding and hanging out. And I see videos every week. It seems like you guys are trying as hard as you can to make friends and to make memories and make the best of the situation. God has given us a people. He's given us an InsideOut family, a small group of people to like, hey, this is weird. We all feel it. We all know it. We're gonna get through it together. And then lastly, God's given us a purpose. That just like God promised with Abram, he's like, hey, through you, the people of the world will be blessed. God has a purpose for you. The reason that we try so hard, the reason we want so badly to figure this out and get back to doing InsideOut and to doing things like we do here at Brownsbridge is because our community is counting on you. The people in our community are counting on us figuring this out because there are a lot of people who've lost jobs. There are people who are gonna have to like move. There are people who have lost loved ones. There are people who this has impacted greatly and they don't know what to do. And those are the same people that are gonna sit next to you in class. They're gonna be on your sports teams. They're going to share a job with you at your jobs and your workplaces, and you guys get jobs. And they're gonna be like, hey, my life is kind of spiraling right now and I don't know what to do. Everything seems bad. And in that moment, I want you to be like, hey, like this is crazy. And I know that everything seems to be going out of control and out of whack for you. But like, hey, would you be willing to come like to church with me sometime? Could you like to come experience what we do on Sunday afternoons? Now, it's weird and we're doing all this COVID stuff. It's not normal, but like, hey, it's at least a place where you can belong before you believe. It's at least a place where they're gonna love you and accept you no matter what. See, there are people at your school that are counting on you to live out the purpose that God has planned for you. And I know that because we look back at the story of Abram in a couple chapters later in Genesis 15, God makes these big promises to Abram. And I told you like, hey, like if I would have been him, I probably wouldn't have believed it. I probably wouldn't have bought into it. I probably would have been super skeptical that God was actually gonna do what he said he was gonna do. But listen to Abram's response. In Genesis chapter 15, verse 6, he says, Abram believed the Lord, and he, meaning God, credited it to him, meaning Abram, as righteousness. He basically said, hey, I believe you, God. I don't know how you're gonna do it. I don't know what this looks like, but I trust you that you're gonna figure it out, and I will walk with you every step of the way. And at that point in time, there was this amazing thing that happened, that God decided to set up a covenant with Abram. And in God's covenant with Abram, they did it like they did it back thousands of years ago. And since none of us lived thousands of years ago, I wanna explain what that means, because a covenant for us is like a contract. Like we both sign our names to a piece of paper that says, hey, I'll do this and you do that. And that's how we make a covenant in our day and age. In theirs, it was a little weirder. They took a bunch of animals, livestock, birds, things like that, and they murdered them. Told you it was gonna get weird. And then they, not only did they kill them, they cut them in half, which makes it even weirder. And then they set the two halves of all the animals that they killed kind of on either side and made like a little aisle down the middle. And typically, when they're making a covenant, they kill all these animals and they cut them in half and make a little aisle. And the person who is like doing the work of the covenant stands back and watches the other person who's like, hey, I promise I'll fulfill everything, walks through the middle of that, basically as a symbol that says, hey, if I don't keep my end, may it happen to me what's happened to these animals, right? Like it's like a very serious thing. It's like, cut in half. I don't know about you guys, but don't sign me up for that. And so as Abram, he's like, God, let's make a covenant. And so God says, okay, let's make a covenant. So Abram begins to prepare everything. And as he gets ready to walk through it, here's what it says in Genesis 15, 17, 18. It says, when the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the two pieces. And on that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram. See, Abram did all the hard work and he killed the animals and he cut them in half and he made the aisle and he's getting ready to walk through it. And God appears to him as this like flaming torch, this like, this smoking fire pot, and passes through the things before Abram. And in that moment, what God is telling Abram is he's saying, hey, I'm gonna make all the promises. It's on you to trust me and keep them. And God says, and if it doesn't happen, I'll be the one that pays the price. He's like, hey, if you don't keep the promises, I'll pay the price. And if that sounds familiar to you, it sounds a lot like exactly what God did through his son Jesus thousands of years later. That over time, if you've heard the story of the Israelites, they constantly betray God and they go against God's wishes and they forget the promises that God's made them time and time again. And God forgives them and he forgives them and he forgives them. And time again, they turn their back on him and they worship other gods. And it's just this repeating cycle that goes on and on and on and on. And God says, okay, enough is enough. I'm sending my son Jesus. And they literally hung him up on a cross and killed him. And God's like, I'll pay the price for Israel's lack of faith. And I find that story so fascinating because honestly, it's a great picture of our relationship with God. Is that time and time again, God comes through with us, God makes promises to us, and he tells us exactly what he wants us to do. And we believe it one time, and the next time we figure it out ourselves or we go our own way and we betray what God has for us. But time and time again, God says, hey, I sent my son and I've already paid the price for your forgetfulness. I've already paid the price for your doubt. I've already paid the price for your lack of trust in me. And so ultimately, what I want us to look at and believe today is that regardless of whether you believe it or not, God is faithful to come through on his promises. Regardless if you believe it or not, God has a plan through all of this crazy, weird season of life that we're living in. Regardless of whether you believe it or not, God has a purpose for you in all of this. And regardless of whether you believe it or not, we can trust God because he is faithful with his promises. The more you read about God, the more you read about the promises that he's made, he comes through every single time. And it doesn't always look how the people who are in the story want it to. Sometimes we're like Abram, we're caught on our heels. We're like, that's not how I thought this was gonna go, God, and I wasn't expecting you to do it like that. But I think in this season, God is giving us a challenge and he's giving you guys promises that I want you to hold on to when you leave here tonight. Because in all of this, God has given us a place where we can gather and we can be a part of this bigger family known as InsideOut. And he's given you a group of people to like talk about this with and just kind of to be like my friend Jake and be like, hey, this is kind of weird, right? Like we're all kind of, this is crazy that we're still dealing with this 8 months later, right? Like we have a group of people that he's given you to walk through this with. And ultimately, he's given you a purpose. He's given you a calling to go out and help others who are struggling with all the same stuff that you guys are wrestling with. See, at this time tonight, I want us to kind of close, before we go to small group, I want us to kind of close with a song. And some of you guys may have heard the song, and some of you, it may be brand new. And either way, that's okay. The band's gonna come and lead us in this closing song. But the words to it are amazing. They're essentially kind of Abram, also known as Abraham's journey with God. And in the song, it kind of declares, it says, God, you are like, great is your faithfulness to me, God. Like time and time again, I doubt you. Time and time again, I'm not sure that you're gonna come through. But time and time again, Lord, I'm reminded that your faithfulness to me is great. So tonight, what I want us to do, the band's gonna lead us in this song. I'm gonna pray and then they're gonna lead us in this song. And I want you to pay so close attention to the words. And I want you to pray those words. I want you to sing those words. I want you to like mean those words and to cling to those tonight. After the band plays, I'll come back out and kind of set up small group for you guys to meet with your groups right here in the room. But first, let's pray. God, thank you so much just for what your word teaches us. For the story of Abram who, God, honestly, he had to have a tremendous amount of faith to believe the promises you made him. God, all across this room, we have students who are probably kind of in the same boat right now. They're having to have a tremendous amount of faith to believe the promises that, Lord, you have a plan in all this, that you know what you're doing and that you have a purpose for us through all of it. But Lord, I pray that tonight we walk out of here believing that you have not just a plan for us, but you've created a place for us to gather. You've created a people for us to go through it with, and that in our purpose, Lord, we can be the kind of people that you've called us and created us to be. So God, as we sing these words, I pray that you would just receive them as a prayer from your people, from inside out, Lord, that we would not just sing them, but we would mean them. And Lord, that as we leave this place, we would live them out. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.